Hey guys, Jerry Berg here, and I am making a video that is basically been a long time coming, but I've noticed the popularity of this topic is just booming lately in the HEMA world and in basically the armchair historian world too. So what I wanted to do was make a video to clarify some misconceptions that I've been seeing about my favorite weapon and yours, or one of my favorite weapons and yours. These sexy things. These are popularly known as Makana, or in the native Aztec language called of Nahuatl, called Macuahuitl. So I wanted to clarify some details about these things, clarify some misconceptions, and go over basically the proper customs needed to properly fight with these. Because I've seen a lot of people doing it basically incorrectly. So, first I want to go over some details about the Aztecs and about the Makana, then basically go into what I've been seeing, and then show you what should be done, and explain a little bit about that. So first, let's go over the Aztecs and the Makana. So the Aztecs were arguably the most powerful culture empire in pre-Columbian North America. The only other culture in the entire Americas that they might be comparable to would be the Incans. However, there are some important differences. The Incan Empire were in South America, and I want to clarify the Aztecs were in Central America, Mexico, which is North America. I've seen lots of people refer to the Aztec culture and the Makana as a South American weapon, and that is not the case. Also, I wanted to point out that there is zero evidence, or at least nothing guaranteed evidence that is contact between the Aztecs and the Incan cultures. So don't think that they crossed over or got inspired or anything like that. If they did have contact, it was minimal and essentially unimportant. So the next thing I want to clarify is that the Makana, or Macuahuitl, was not exclusively an Aztec weapon. There were so many different cultures in Central America that used a variation of the Makana, or the Makana as we popularly love it today. Not just the Aztecs, but also the Tarascans, Tlaxcalans, the Totonacs, and even the Taino, and arguably the Mayans as well. Now, you don't see so many depictions of the Makana in some of these cultures. The Aztecs very clearly had the most common depictions of it. There's also a lot of, I want to say, Makana fan theories out there about variations that possibly could have existed. One of them being a curved Makana, another one being a Makana with very heavy spikes on the side. That's not a thing. That's not a thing either. There's lots of documented evidence or pictorial evidence of Makanas. No surviving Makanas, and I'll tell the story of that in a bit. But lots of pictorial evidence, so please don't let your fantasies, don't let your imaginations get the best of you, which is essentially the gist of this entire video here. So I wanted to point out what the Makana actually is, too. So firstly, know that these terms come from the Spanish translation of the native word. It leads to a lot of unusual spelling and difficult to pronounce words when you see it written. So the first time the conquistadors encountered the Makana was actually from the native tribe on Cuba, or Havana, where they settled, the Taino culture. And they did have a Makana. In fact, they called it, quote unquote, Makana, as opposed to the Aztec world, Macuahuitl. That's where the difference comes from. The Taino Makana, and hopefully I'll get some videos and images and put it up here. The Taino Makana was simply, picture a wooden sword. It looked like this without these black blades on the side, which I'll get to in a second. And it did usually have a slightly pointed tip as well. So that was the conquistadors' first encounter with a Makana, and that is why the conquistadors continue to refer to it as a Makana throughout the conquest, is because they were familiar with it that way. But once they reached the mainland, where there were a lot more natural resources, they discovered this style of Makana Macuahuitl, where these black chips on the side here were actually made out of a volcanic glass called obsidian, which is very fascinating because when you get the chips of obsidian and you take, for example, a microscope to it, you can see that the edges of the obsidian can actually get microscopically sharper than any steel sword possibly could. Which leads to a lot of very cool depictions or recounts of Aztecs with Macanas being able to decapitate one of the Spanish war horses. However, it is very brittle, so if they used it once or twice or didn't realize the thickness of Spanish armor and hit that, it would essentially break. So that's what this is on the side. That leads to some debates. Is this a club? Is this a sword? Which I may make a later video on just to save the length of time for this one. Is the Makana a sword or a club? We'll go over that another day. So what I wanted to do now is go over some of the misconceptions that I have seen in the HEMA community, in the armchair historian community. Unfortunately, I haven't seen too much reenacting in this community. I've had the pleasure of being partaking in a conquistador reenactment where we had an Aztec reenactor, and that was just amazing. I'll probably put some videos up there or images later on. So let's see, where do I start? So the first thing that I've noticed is that a lot of people kind of misconstrue the size of the Makana. This is especially popular in the HEMA community. This particular Makana is an unusually small version. There is a conquistador called the Anonymous Conquistador who kept records, either a memoir or a diary, most likely a memoir, of his experiences conquering the Aztecs in the New World. And he described the Macanas as a one-handed weapon, 3.5 to 4 feet long, where the wooden part was only as thick as 3 fingers. Okay? So that's where a lot of the misconceptions I see come from. There's a lot of Macanas out there that are just thick, nasty, ogre-looking clubs. And that's not the case. This is actually a very fine and finesse-worthy weapon. The other thing that I've noticed is, and this is especially true for the HEMA community, is when you attack with it, they require a draw on the attack for the points to count. I disagree with this wholeheartedly for 2 reasons. One, because it became popular on the show Deadliest Warrior, which I love, but doesn't do a lot of deep thinking into it. So they discovered that instead of whacking at the side of beef or artificial jelly that they were whacking at, they saw it did a lot more damage when you drew it. Yes, that's the case. However, Aztec culture was a very military, religious-based culture, fusing the two, and their form of warfare was about capturing live enemies. And they even had a series of wars, the Garland Wars or the Flower Wars, where they would make a planned, essentially a fake war with a neighboring culture simply for the fact of capturing live people for human sacrifice. They would be sacrificed on the top of one of their pyramids, likely in their main city of Tenochtitlan. So when they talk about damage of drawing the weapon, in reality, and this will probably play a part when you discuss whether it's a blade or a mace, you don't want to kill. You don't want to slice off someone's arm. What you want to do is incapacitate them. So you have the weight of the handle with the cutting power of the obsidian to basically wound someone, but not kill them. You'll be killing them later on in ritual. The other thing I've noticed is that they do not allow stabbing in HEMA with that. Now that, again, I disagree with. Because, as I just said, they use this weapon to incapacitate, not to kill. And what's the best way to incapacitate someone but keep them alive? Knock them in the head. And they would likely, arguably, use the tip of the Makana to whack someone knock them out. The other thing is there are depictions of Makanas where they have a very pointed piece of obsidian at the very end of the weapon, which would imply stabbing. The last thing, and this is the absolute most important thing that I've noticed as a misconception about the Makana, is that it is used as a one-handed weapon. Now, what I mean by that is not that it should be used two-handed, but in fact, the one-handed Makana, in all sorts of depictions, was never used by itself. It always had a shield. Now, this one is called, in native Nahuatl, it would be called a chimai, or if you want to anglicize it, chamali, or just call it a shield. I created this one. It's a little worn down. I kept it in storage for the winter. But it was a very versatile shield. And I created the back based on a surviving example in one of the museums. However, what's fascinating about it is when I've done more recent research since it, is that you could use it like a rotella, how I've got it right now. Or, and unfortunately I didn't make it capable of this perfectly, you can actually grab the two straps and hold it in the center and use it like a buckler. It's very fascinating, very cool. However, I did want to point out that every single time a Makana is used and depicted, it's with a shield. The amount of times that I've seen a Makana wielded one-handed is next to nothing. So that's where the biggest issue that I've seen, especially in HEMA community, is people using the Makana one-handed. I do see some very fascinating uses. Some people trying to use it similar to a saber. They do kind of a swinging attack while you do it. However, there are lots of depictions from various sources, various codexes, depicting Aztecs wielding a chimai and a Macuahuitl in combat. And they are in very distinct guards or stances, most commonly like this. I don't know if you can see on the entire video there, I might be too close. Frequently with it down. I've also seen it forward like this, and I'll see if I can post some pictures of that. But basically my promise, and I've argued whether I'm going to make this a promise or not, I promise to you that within a year's time I will create a HEMA guide for properly using a Macuahuitl and Chamali, Makana and Shield, based on documented evidence and history. The only use of the Makana that I have seen so far is based on assumption, looking at the Makana and guessing how it's used. I find that no better than the people who grab a greatsword, a Zweihander or a claymore, and just wield it with those big, slow, sweeping attacks, because they look at it and assume that's how it's used, when in reality, as we all know, all of us longswordsmen know, that's not how you properly use a greatsword. And that's the same thing I'm seeing. That's not how you properly use a Makana. So I will make a manual. Give me a year. I'll see if I can make it sooner. But I am going to do that for you, because I see it wielded so incorrectly, and I want to fix it. There are a few other details I wanted to go over. One of which is that, like I said, this is a small Makana. I've made a few wooden wasters of Makana that I've been able to use in combat. This one is more likely to the proper length of it. However, the handle is especially long. They would not be this long. The reason that I made this one is because I did make the larger two-handed version right here. But it is huge, and we discovered very quickly that using this waster in combat, even though it's made out of wood and that the blades here are just painted on, you can cause some serious damage with it. So I made this one and cut down some of the blades here so we could wield it two-handed, which is an entirely different weapon than the Makana we're talking about here. I'll probably make a video for that later on too. So that's essentially what I wanted to point out here. The Makana is one of my favorite weapons, but I'm seeing it being bastardized by people who like Warhammer 40k and think it looks like a chainsword, and people who just look at it and think that's how it's properly used without realizing that there's lots of documented evidence. The only surviving Makana that apparently survived the conquest that has been discovered was one that was captured by Cortez, brought to Europe, and it was basically kept in a museum for centuries until the late 1800s, when that museum burned down and the Makana itself was lost. But there is a very fascinating image of that Makana that was sketched out in the 1840s, I believe. And I'll put that there. And I wanted to point out, when you look at it, the blades are touching. There is no gap in between the blades, which implies a lot of a lack of the need for a draw like that, because people think it looks like a saw, which it does, arguably, but not all of them are that. It's also very thin, which implies a much faster use and not the need of the big swings. And the last misconception that I've seen, and it's usually in recreations or reproductions that I've seen, where the obsidian blades are actually gnarly and chipped one way or another. They look very gross, not very pretty. But the Aztecs were actually a very uniformed society. They actually had a holiday, and I don't quote me on it because I don't know it off the top of my head, but it was a holiday all about making the arrows for their archers, and the holiday was all about making the arrows the exact same width, the exact same length, so that when the archers shot, they would know how they were properly shot, or it would be the same every time, which is why I believe that that's an indication that the Aztecs would do the same with their Makana as well. So that's all I'm going to say about that right now. I know this is a lot of our favorite weapons, but I believe that it deserves the historical respect that I haven't seen being given to it lately. That's why I made this video. We all love the Aztec Macana. Please use it with a chamali. And please don't say that it's South American. That just irks me. So anyway, I will catch you guys later. Thank you for watching. And please comment. I'd love to hear your advice on this. All right, I'll talk to you later.